So the San Antonio Spurs are coming off of the worst seasons in their franchise's history over the last 2 decades. And even though that sounds really bad, the only reason it's bad is because the Spurs have been so consistently great over the past 2 decades. Last season, they were only the 10th seed and they lost in the play-in tournament. For some teams, that would be a huge accomplishment, but for the Spurs, that's pretty not that well, considering what they've done over the past 2 decades. With them losing several role players and their best player, DeMar DeRozan, in free agency, it's starting to look like the Spurs are going to be heading in the rebuilding direction and focusing solely on their young players. That's led me to make this video where I'll be discussing how I would fix the San Antonio Spurs to make them become title contenders in the future. Before we get into the video, I ask you to drop a like on this video as it does help my channel grow. Subscribe to my channel if you want daily NBA content as I post literally every single day. Also, if you want to help me reach my goal of 1,500 subscribers, also drop a comment on this video as I do respond to all of my comments, and play that intro. First step I would take to making sure the San Antonio Spurs have a bright future is solely focusing on their young talent. And to be honest, that's not too hard of a task since basically this whole team is filled with a bunch of young players and their best players are young players. And it kind of has led me to believe that they're not going to be that good this season, and that's okay. I think they should try and let DeJounte Murray fully develop because I think he could be one of the 10 best guards in the league when he reaches his peak, because don't forget he just came off of a season averaging 16 points, 7 rebounds, and 5 assists, shooting 45% from the field while playing very good defense. I generally think he could take the leap to be an 18 to 20 point scorer next season, and I think he can be an all-star type player. And I think he's really underrated because he's better than guards like Lonzo Ball in my opinion. They also have Keldon Johnson, who's a guy who I think has the most potential on this team. I think he's gonna have a breakout year because he's probably the second best player on this team, maybe even the first. And a lot of people didn't know he averaged 13 points last year. I could honestly see him averaging over 20 points this season if he gets the opportunity, and I honestly think he has superstar potential, because although I don't want to take the big leap and say he's a superstar, like he's gonna be a superstar or anything like that, but I think at worst he's gonna be a really good starter in the NBA. Well, he probably already is a really good starter in the NBA. They also have Devin Vassell, who although I don't think he's going to be a superstar, maybe even an all-star player at all, I definitely think he could be a really good starter in the NBA, because in just his first season, he showed a decent ability on the defensive side of the floor, and he shot 34% from 3, and I think in the future he can improve that. Also, Lonnie Walker is a guy who I think could be a good 6-man off the bench who averages like 15 points. Let me not forget he's also a guy who can create his own shot. And let me not forget the guy who they drafted in this year's NBA draft in Josh Primo. He's the guy who I think could be like maybe even all-star. I don't know. I'll have to see him play in the NBA, but he can create his own shot. He's really good at scoring the ball. He has really good handles. He's really skinny right now, and I definitely think he will struggle coming straight into the NBA. And I think they definitely should look into giving him some play time, let him get his confidence up, because he might have star potential. So the first step I would take is making sure I play all of the Spurs young players this year, because in past years they played their more like veteran type of players over their young players because they were trying to win. But this season I think it's a must that they give their young players a lot of play time, experience, and freedom. The second step I would take to ensure the San Antonio Spurs have a bright future is trying to tank for a top 5 pick in this year in the future NBA draft. And before some people get annoyed, I don't mean they should be purposely trying to lose, like selling games at the end. But I do think regardless of whether or not they try to win, I do think they're not going to be a playoff team this year, and I doubt they even make the play-in, especially without DeMar DeRozan. So I think they're probably going to be one of the 5 worst teams in the NBA this season. There's honestly nothing wrong with that because the Spurs have a bunch of good young talent, as I said, but they don't have that one guy who's for sure going to be a superstar. They don't have that Cade Cunningham type of guy. They don't have John Morant. They have De'Aaron Fox or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They have a bunch of guys who can maybe be stars, but they don't have that guy who we know for sure is going to be a star in the NBA. And I feel like if they got a high pick in the draft, they would definitely select the right player because they have one of the best front offices in the league. So if they somehow get the 8th seed, that's not even an accomplishment because you're stuck in the worst position in the NBA, which is being mediocre, and they're not going to improve as a team going forward. So the second step I would take to making sure the Spurs have a bright future is making sure they're one of the worst teams in the league this year while playing their young players a lot of minutes. The third step I would take to make sure the San Antonio Spurs have a nice future is trading Thaddeus Young. And although this is something that kind of seems like a small move, Thaddeus Young actually has a lot of potential, because if you didn't know, he actually is one of the best bench players in the league last season with his great defense, passing, and inside scoring. He might even been 6th man of the year if the Bulls were actually winning games, and a lot of teams would definitely be willing to give up a little bit for him. I think their teammates should probably look to move him is the Boston Celtics or Minnesota Timberwolves, and in return they could probably ask the Celtics for like Josh Richardson, Grant Williams, maybe a few second-round picks, and for the Timberwolves they could just ask for a first-round pick since they have the money. And I feel like that type of move would really help the Spurs out, because it would give them some assets in return for an old veteran, and obviously Thaddeus Young would help whatever team he goes to. To be honest, I just think that he should be traded pretty soon, because he's on an expiring contract, and the earlier you trade him, the more he could possibly get. I think it makes more sense to trade him during the beginning of the season rather than at the trade deadline, because I think you could get more. And obviously you're not trying to win this year, so he's just gonna be putting up empty stats for you. The fourth and final step I would take to make sure the San Antonio Spurs have a bright future is making Keldon Johnson the leading shot taker and basically the #1 option on this team this season. And I know I kind of already discussed that the Spurs should let their young players get a lot of minutes and things like that, but Keldon Johnson, in my opinion, is the only guy who has superstar potential on this team, and yet by far has the most potential on this team, and he very well just might be the best player on the team right now. So I think he should be the #1 option going into the season. And I bring it up because last season he was 5th in shots attempted per game, and he was literally like 0.2 shots away from being the 9th leading shot taker a game. So it's clear that he's not aggressive enough, or he just doesn't get the ball enough. But regardless, I think Keldon should be shooting the ball 13 to 15 times per game, and if he does that, I could honestly see him being a 22 to 23 points per game scorer, because he's really efficient. He also needs to work on his shooting a little bit, and I think he can be a really good player. I also think making him the #1 option will just help him progress as a player, because if you never give the player the opportunity to be the best player on a team and take like some difficult shots, a lot of times they won't turn into that star type of player. It's kind of like how the Spurs gave the keys to Kawhi, and then he turned into a superstar. If they didn't give him those keys, he probably wouldn't have turned as good as he was so quick. Maybe he would never have been that. And it's kind of like how the Raptors gave the keys to DeMar DeRozan when he turned into a star type of player. So you just have to give the player, like the player with most potential on your team, the most shots, in my opinion, especially if you're not trying to win. I think it would increase the chance that Kevin becomes a superstar level player, because Keldon is really a player who can be a superstar, and if he became a superstar, it would drastically, and I mean drastically, help this team going into the future, because you can't become a dynasty like they were before without having a superstar. They need their Tim Duncan type of player. They're probably not going to get a player as good as him, but they just need a top 10 player in the league, and I feel like they already have their Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Bruce Brown type of players surrounding them, and DeJounte Murray, Josh Primo, Lonnie Walker, Devin Vassell, and maybe Keldon Johnson, depending on how good he comes. Obviously, they probably won't be as good as Parker or Ginobili, but you know what I mean. To conclude the video, the Spurs actually have one of the more underrated futures in the league. Main reason they're not like talked about as much because their future is because they're the Spurs and they have a stigma around them being boring. Also, they don't have a young player who like stands out crazy amount, like a Trae Young, Kate Cunningham, Jalen Green, Luka Doncic, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, anyone like that. But I do think they have a bunch of guys who can maybe be all-stars or really good starters in the NBA. They just need that one guy who could become a real superstar. Maybe it's Keldon Johnson, but I guess we'll have to see. Anyways, guys, that's it for the video. Let me know what you think the Spurs should do. Drop a like on this video as it does help my channel grow. Subscribe to my channel if you want daily NBA content, because I post literally every single day. Also, if you want to help me reach my goal of 1,500 subscribers, also drop a comment on this video as I do respond to all of my comments. And I'm out.